Welcome everybody. Just a reminder, we'll get started in about 2 or 3 minutes time. Welcome guys, and again, we're just gonna give everybody another minute or so, and then we'll get started around 3 to 4 minutes past the hour. Okay, just before we get started, guys, just some housekeeping. The session is being recorded and will be available for download after the session. The links will be sent out via email from Cockroach Labs, or they're available on our website as well for you to download and sign up. So let's get started. Today we're joined by Christian from FinLeap Connect, and we're going to have a fireside chat conversation around FinLeap Connect's applications, what they do, the space they're in, and how they're leveraging Cockroach to meet the needs of their customers and set their customers' expectations quite high. So Christian, do you just want to say hello and give a little bit of background into yourself and potentially the company as well?
Yeah, sure. Then thanks for having me, and it's a pleasure to talk about our journey that we had together in the past. Maybe briefly for me, I'm currently the tech director for our cloud environments at FinLeap Connect. I'm at the company for 4 years now, joined in 2018, and I'll stick to some slides to present the company briefly so that we have a bit of an overview. So brief introduction of the company, what we do, where we are. So we are located in Germany, and that's our headquarters. So FinLeap Connect operates in the open banking market, which is a massively and fast-growing global market. So it's essentially all over the world, which are affecting numerous businesses and numerous countries likewise. So we operate in this currently in Europe as the leading independent European B2B 2X open banking platform. The headquarters, as I said, is in Germany. We have offices in Berlin and Hamburg, but we also have offices in Madrid, in Spain, and in Italy, and also something in France. And our products are in 11 countries. And we also have a pan-EU reach through PSD2 license passporting. PSD2 licensing is this whole endeavor in the EU to have access to bank accounts by means of APIs. It's called Payment Service Directive 2. So it was institutionalized by the EU open up the banking market, hence open banking. And that's where we operate in. Product-wise, what can you imagine? What do we do? So it all starts on the left side here with connectivity. So we connect bank accounts of people with their consent, of course. So that's always all included in this whole regulated market and this whole PSD2 concept that everything is secure and everybody has to provide their consent and can also withdraw their consent to have these kind of accesses. So we access our customers, end users accounts, retrieve various data. Then within this open banking platform, we have a couple of products that range from categorization, data enrichment, and analysis functionalities over account aggregation services all the way to payment solutions. And then in between, you have this customer apps that use the data, leverage it to create something new and modern or embedded into other flows in online shops, or there's various use cases here. And on the right-hand side, this goes all the way to what we call money management solutions like personal finance management, or things like the account switch kit. So if you want to switch from bank A to bank B, you need all this data, and you want to automatically inform all of the companies that you have contracts with, etc., to update your bank credentials. Then that is what you can use with one of our products here. So that's in a nutshell what we operate in. So it's a very regulated, very, very strict, very heavy on security market, but also one that is scaling pretty fast.
Yeah, it's a growing market, and we're seeing it a lot at Cockroach Labs. The fintech space, and particularly around these types of applications, is one of the fastest growing applications and spaces. So no, that's good. And I always like to ask, how did you first hear about Cockroach DB, Christian?
I think it's been in 2018 when we were basically just looking for a solution. Like when I joined the company, we were brought on board to basically lead this cloud native transformation. And one of the many aspects of that was, how do we solve persistency? And we basically just did a research and then looked at the available solutions. And that was sometime in fall 2018 when we looked in the landscape, in the CNCF landscape. And I think discovered and Cockroach, and looked to some talks, and then eventually just talked to you guys as one of the options on the table.
Yeah, so it's very much sort of discovery. You were looking at your options, and then you ultimately had to settle on one or two to start building out your application. So in terms of your solution, then can you give us some background into what your solution does, why you chose Cockroach as the underlying solution, and also if you think of any other sort of integrated technologies, particularly in the cloud native world, and just give us sort of the landscape of how that's set up for yourself at Finley Connect.
Yeah. So in 2018, what we were looking at is we had this open banking stack that we called it, or it's called also the Finex API. So it's basically this API product that back then ran on a traditional setup with VMs and stuff on a hardware node. So we are talking a private bare metal cloud setup here. And this started to be problematic for various reasons. It was kind of old, it was kind of inflexible. The company had to scale, and that wasn't really supported by that setup in the day. So we were brought on board to not only put that onto something that's scalable, but also to transform how the software was rolled out, how deployments worked, and how changes were done. And so this initial product really was this API product that we had to somehow move from these VMs to Kubernetes. So I would say it's a pretty usual way of doing that, a pretty usual story. And so this application is based around mostly Python back in the day. The connectivity part is largely TypeScript. Meanwhile, we also have Golang and Java in the mix, and so that's we had a quite diverse setup of services here. It was mostly microservices, so that was where this all started from. And Yeah, so the initial project was to bring up a Kubernetes cluster, to also introduce it, to make it known to in the company to the developers, and basically figure it all out. Like, how do we deploy? How do we work with that? Introduce GitOps, introduce security mechanisms, introduce immutability of deployments, Helm charts, Docker, all of that. So it was a lot of stuff that we crammed into what essentially was a 9-month period of initial innovation until we had to roll out the first customer or migrate the first customer to this new environment.
Yeah, and so it was truly sort of a global transformation project. It wasn't just looking at the persistence tier. It needed to look at the entire stack from application down to persistence tier. So I know everybody watching this is probably going to ask this question later on. So what persistence or what database platform did you have originally before you were looking at Cockroach, and what sort of issues did you run into with that platform?
So initially what we had was a MySQL database that ran on AVM. So that was the setup. And that was then replicated to a secondary site if needs be. So that was a failover scenario. And this happened relatively often. So this platform, as it grew older, was also problematic in that sense. And it also became slow because we couldn't extend it, we couldn't scale it, we could only vertically scale it up. And it held all the data essentially. So that was MySQL. People were eager to also maybe switch to Postgres because they found maybe that's better for some reasons. But when we talked about this Kubernetes migration, we said, okay, we wanted to try and put everything onto Kubernetes, to only use Kubernetes as the underlying foundation and then put stuff on top of it. Yeah, and that was the interesting bit where we had then to make a decision.
Yes, and let's hope you made the right decision with Cockroach DB. So you mentioned the active passive sort of primary secondary, which comes up an awful lot in the database space, and we think it's a very sort of legacy way of doing things, because ultimately it'll involve downtime within the application at some point for any operational mechanism, whether it's upgrades, whether it's a DR situation or an issue. What impact does that have, particularly on your application in your space around you mentioned payments, you mentioned payments aggregators, banking aggregators, things like that. What does that do for customer experience if that failover mechanism had to kick in? Yeah,
we had as I said, this whole platform was quite problematic. We had numerous on-call incidents during nights in 2018. So customers weren't really too happy with the performance or the uptime availability of this platform back in the day. So going for something that would allow for seamless failover scenarios was, of course, the dream of everybody. And it's a natural thing that if you do not have to have this failover scenario, which also lasted like spinning it all up and doing it all like was an hour of work or something. So even if you said, okay, let's switch over, it was still an hour until it was actually in place. And you can imagine we have SLAs, we have, there's times where this is not as problematic, but yeah. Another thing that was also big was schema migrations, which was, so new versions of this application with changes in the data model required in schema migrations, which required a downtime that had to be planned at maintenance windows, which slowed down rollout times. Okay, we have this new release, we can deploy it in a month or so, depending on the customer and the contract. And you can imagine that's also interesting. We have, even today, we have a SaaS offering. So that's hosted for shared customers. So it's shared by customers, but we also do dedicated setups that are isolated. So we have customers that demand that really want their own stack of everything. So we had this not only once, but we had this set up like 12 times back in the day. Today, it's even more. So that was also an interesting aspect. How can we automate the operation of everything, but also especially of the databases, automate backups, automate rollbacks, and features like background schema migrations is very nice to have because it directly reduces the requirement to have maintenance periods.
Yeah, no, and again, we see that a lot. Online schema changes are very, very powerful tools, particularly when you run, quite advanced CI/CD pipelining and things like that, that you want to deploy very, very easily, very quickly in an automated fashion. Having the ability to do that with no downtime is definitely one of Cockroach's strong points then, as opposed to some of the other technologies. So, I mean, you've hit on a lot of great points there, Christian. I mean, first of all, you mentioned the scalability aspect, the fact that you can horizontally scale Cockroach. You've mentioned the survivability and the resiliency aspect of never having to take Cockroach DB down, which enhances customer experience and means you can run a platform really that is truly 24/7, 365 days a year, as required. The other big thing that I know you guys are really, really, really keen on, and you've mentioned it a couple of times already, is the Kubernetes aspect. We all know that Kubernetes was predominantly built to run stateless applications. However, when you try to move a stateful application like a database platform, like MySQL, like Postgres, like Oracle and SQL Server, it's very, very difficult to just migrate them, pick them up, and put them into an orchestration framework like Kubernetes. So, I mean, Cockroach did a pretty good job, I think, right at the start of developing Cockroach DB, that we knew that we had to run inside of an orchestration tool like Kubernetes. So, do you want to give us your experiences of that deployment process and how you think that's helped both internally with your developers and your operators, and also externally with your customer experience? The self-recovery options of both Cockroach DB and Kubernetes goes hand in hand, I think. So,
yeah, that was certainly a big game changer. So the expectations were also high because we had all these issues, and we were always saying, yeah, Kubernetes this, Kubernetes that, self-healing capabilities or self-killing capabilities, depending on how you want to see that. So we, in April 1st in 2019, we migrated the first customer, and then from there on, for 6 months, we migrated the customers one after the other. And with every migration, the situation just got better and better and better. The on-call situation relieved itself and all that. So we could immediately see that. Also, the uptime went up. So we really had this relief immediately once we moved over. From the deployment perspective, we also looked at other solutions that were potentially interesting to be maybe more on the MySQL side or on the Postgres side, but nothing was really as simple in terms of the operators aspect than Cockroach. I can really say that it's been, we deployed it from the Helm chart and it worked. It was only a change, I think, for the developers in terms of, okay, now we have a distributed database. It requires retries, and that was a bit where we had to put in some work, also with your support team, to get this going and to make changes to the code base. But essentially, this whole capability of rolling things out as a Helm chart in a GitOps pipeline. So we have this pull-based deployment mechanism where we just have everything in the pipeline defined, and it just gets rolled out through our GitLab pipelines onto our clusters. And being able to do that with a database as well is just nice. And we can also use that in our dev environments to spin up the environments for test purposes. And then we have a little job that initializes the database, adds the user we need, creates the database schema, and then the application can start working.
Yeah. So, I mean,
and likewise with these migrations. Yeah.
Yeah. So in terms of product development efficiency, then that increased for you guys because of the simplicity of obviously being able to do this through different environments like dev, QA, prod, all in an automated fashion. So your developers are a lot more productive because of that, I'm guessing.
Yeah. This standardization really allowed us to say we have this dev cluster and it's shared by the environments, by the developers, I mean, and they can just roll this out. And it doesn't really matter whether you run 1, 2, 3, 5 Cockroach clusters with 3 nodes for dev purposes. Everybody can have their own, and you can spin it up and down quickly because of this automation aspect.
No, that's good. And again, it's another one of those benefits. Anything that can be automated in this day and age is something that should be done. Really, it just removes all of the human aspect of development, which is good. I want to move on now and talk a little bit more about your particular application and how your solution is architected, because I do know from previous conversations and working closely with you guys that you do run in multiple cloud providers as well, and across what we call in in the world sort of federated Kubernetes clusters as well, which is quite advanced. So do you want to give the guys a little bit of background on how you've managed to get that set up, how you're running in multi-cloud, and if you're using any particular products to make that more efficient and easier to do?
Yeah, sure. That's that's the development of the past 2 years. So when we were settled on Kubernetes with this whole stack and everything was working nicely, we thought, okay, what's next? And what we saw is everybody talks about it, hybrid cloud, multi-cluster. People say you don't need that. Others say you need it. We additionally are in the regulated space, and there's always this phantom of vendor login around. And you can now argue this is not real or it is real, but matter of factly, we have certain obligations to be able to be flexible, move from one cloud provider to another. And we discovered that this is also interesting for customers to be able to say, I want your stack, but I want it where I want it and not where you think it's good. So we worked into that direction. And again, I'm going to share some small slide here on how that works at the moment. So this is our setup and how we ended up doing that. So we moved ahead to have our infrastructure stack on the very top, which is comprised, I think, to 99% of cloud native CNCF open source solutions. So we really said we wanted to live in that ecosystem, strive in that ecosystem. We are keen adopters of all these community values. We visit KubeCon regularly. So this is really something where we see a lot of benefits in terms of collaborating with others as well. In this open source community. So we built this whole stack from these solutions. There's some picks here and there where we have enterprise tools, like for instance, an Elastic Stack, or we also then bought and purchased CockroachDB Enterprise for the incremental backup solutions and encryption at rest and these kind of things. But that's the top layer of our internal platform, essentially. The foundation of which is Kubernetes. So everywhere is Kubernetes. So where we can get Kubernetes, we can roll out the stack and we can also put then our applications on top. And now the interesting part here was then how do we get Kubernetes in a unified way, or also in a uniform way, so that you get a uniform Kubernetes experience across different providers. And after a bit of looking back and forth, we found that a project from SAP called Gardener is exactly delivering that. That's a project that SAP started like 3.5 years ago, where they said, okay, Kubernetes is great. How do we use it all over the place, all over the globe for all our things? And they developed this enterprise Kubernetes cluster manager. It's open source. And it's a quite vibrant community, I think, especially also in Germany here. And it basically has providers for all of these for all of the public cloud providers, also for Equinix Metal these days. You can run it on OpenStack. It works with VMware, vCenter. So you really have this flexibility going from private cloud all the way to public cloud. And that's what we do these days. So we run clusters on OpenStack at a provider in Germany, in Frankfurt. We run clusters on AWS. We run clusters on Google Cloud, depending on what the regulators permit, what is best for the customer, or what we just need also. And by merging these two ideas of having this uniform layer where we get Kubernetes and on top building on cloud native standard solutions, we really enabled ourselves to deploy our entire stack wherever we needed. And yes, that was something that, especially last year where we did this first go live with a customer in the Middle East region on AWS, people said, wow, this actually worked. We didn't think this was possible, but it was actually possible also in a relatively short time.
Yeah, I mean, what you've essentially done is packaged all of this up into a box that you can deploy pretty much in any environment, on any infrastructure, in any cloud, private or public. Whenever there is a Kubernetes cluster, you will be able to deploy your application. So going back to the theme of this webinar around customer experience, then you mentioned that customers can run their own dedicated, or they can use your software as a service platform. All of this is built around sort of flexibility and the flexibility to deploy into any particular environments. Can you share with us any any particular sort of thoughts from your customers around the benefits they see from having this flexibility within your platform and ultimately, running on top of CockroachDB?
Yeah, it's certainly so. With our shared environment, we of course already adhere and fulfill all the regulatory requirements. It's just that it's shared. So if that is not good enough for you, then you want it somewhere where you have maybe more control. And one of the benefits of using also on the data layer, like for Cockroach, solutions that just run, if you want, within the platform, allows you to put it somewhere where you have this kind of control. So if your organization, if you're a bank that is using Google or AWS or whatever, and you already have this set up and you have it all sorted out, on a compliance end, with your audit streams, with your control mechanisms around for security, privacy, and all that, and we can just plug our system in, complete with the persistency layer and everything included. So you do not have to check marks on other solutions around that, like managed databases from cloud providers, etc. Then that's a real benefit, where you can say, okay, we don't have to take care of these things because it's just in here, and that's we already clarified with everybody, and we have all the paperwork done, and we can just run it inside our sealed garden of what you already understood well and what is already kind of signed off by authorities also. So I think that's where, especially in this market, there's a benefit coming from.
Yeah, it's a pre-approved application. It's pre-approved because you've done all the regulatory due diligence behind of it, and it's very easy then to just promote that to your customers to deploy them, whether they want to use a software as a service or if they have more even stricter, should we say, regulatory reasons, they have the option of deploying it locally as well. So, this slide does say volumes, really, the way that you've architected this. And what we typically see is when everybody runs in a multi-cloud or even a multi-region setup, the most difficult part is managing the networking, particularly in Kubernetes, because you have container network interfaces that you have to deal with on top of underlying, different levels of networking within either cloud providers or with physical data centers. I know you guys are also big advocates of Linkerd as well, which is another open source platform that helps with that sort of layer of things. Can you tell us a little bit of how you manage the networking when you particularly run in a multi-cloud setup?
This is one of the real nice stories on how to maybe at first glance not connected technologies from the cloud native space, in my opinion, can really work well together if you build such a platform from the ground. So also early on in this initial project, we saw, okay, we really need MTLS security between all services. We need everything encrypted, and we also wanted to give our developers a first glance at metrics, like out of the box of the platform. So that's why then we looked for a service mesh in the first place. And we eventually settled with Linkerd 2. Back in the day, it was known as Conduit in the early days. So we were really, really early adopters of it and have grown with it. And they didn't fail they didn't fail us. They really supported us. So on the day of the go live, we were there with the Linkerd that really supported MTLS. And over the time, we then also found other uses for it. So for instance, with Cockroach, as I said, we do not run just one setup, like one big cluster, but we run 30 of them at the moment, I think. They all do not have over excessively high usage, but we need this separation of these Cockroach clusters. And if you run multiple Cockroach clusters and you want to do TLS, for instance, for them, and you want to rotate your certificates frequently, and with frequently, I mean 60 days, for instance, every 60 days, we want to rotate our certificates, then you get into topics where you have to then restart the Cockroach databases. You have to keep track of that. You have to do that so that they pick up the new data, the new certificates, et cetera, et cetera. And that was something where we thought, well, Linkerd kind of does that already. It has this daily rotated proxy certificates. It does TLS. It also now, with the recent releases, introduced policy schemes that allow us to say, okay, only these applications may talk to the database at all. So it also introduced another layer of security here. And that's when we started to get into this, can't we just inject also cockroach with Linkerd? And with the addition of the TCP functionality and support in Linkerd, etc., this actually worked. So we then did that, and with that got rid of this maintenance overhead with the frequent cert rotation requirement we had by just injecting Linkerd with cockroach. And nicely enough, there was also some GitHub discussions, I think, also something we had with you in the support channels. Nowadays, cockroach also supports to have like flags to say, I want secure mode. I'm solving TLS in a different way. Don't be upset. Just give me secure mode. I have my service mesh, and it's doing that for me, that part. So now we have this nice setup where we have cockroach injected with Linkerd, and as we're also using the Buoyant Cloud offering from Buoyant, the company behind Linkerd. This is how that looks like. Then you get these kind of views. So here's one example cockroach that is injected, and this is then how it looks like in Buoyant Cloud, where you get these metrics out, and you see this is actually working. So this is a very nice way of combining these cloud native tools together in a very efficient way and solving real life problems, because it just gave us time back and tick the boxes on this frequent certificate rotation problem.
Yeah, I mean, you've hit a couple of key points there. I mean, efficiency is everything in this day and age, where there's efficiency from developers developing new applications to efficiencies in running infrastructure, or even efficiencies in terms of your front end for your user applications and things like that. Everybody knows if something takes longer than 100, 200 milliseconds these days, then we consider that slow from an app or an end user point of view. So having the ability to integrate all of these different, open source technologies together to get really efficient production, like, applications without too much overhead. And as I mentioned earlier, all of this automated for easy deployment as well. I think you've done fantastically at FinLead Connect. You're right on the cutting edge of technology and really pushing the product or products that you're using forward in such a heavy direction. So on that note, you did mention, that you've worked with us previously. So do you want to speak a little bit about the sort of product feedback cycle? Because I know we've taken a couple of your suggestions, particularly around those TLS flags that you were talking about, and really, try to integrate them with the product as well. So.
Yeah. So throughout the years, we have this, I think, great back and forth between our companies, between developers and support folks from your end, in improving the product, improving, also fixing some bugs. I mean, there were some bugs also. That's natural. So I think this kind of well supported us with our ability to now roll out newer things faster, rolling updates also for databases, and then Cockroach also delivering new versions in time. This is really a nice match in that sense. And this whole Linkerd Cockroach story and how this now works together is especially nice, considering also how simple this is. You don't need to talk to like big corp. Can you please do? And then you have arrangements. You just kind of go to this slide, go to that slide, call somebody bring people together. And this is kind of the essence of this whole cloud native community also to me. And it's really nice that we can leverage that from networking layers over to persistent layers, and it enhances the overall product that we then build on top of that. So that's really a tremendous benefit that I see in this whole ecosystem.
Yeah, it's the agility of the smaller companies, to really want to help you rather than need to help you, because I think wanting to help gives a lot more value than needing to help in a lot more of, the application spaces that you guys you're in, particularly critical applications that you guys are building. So, no, that's again some really nice feedback there. So in terms of how successful you've been with Cockroach and building out your application that you've talked about today, are you guys thinking about any new applications and how you can leverage Cockroach in those newer applications?
Oh yes, certainly. So we have this other database that is kind of custom built, which is holding a special setup with. That has a lot of tiny databases. It's called Nox, and it's it's a special way to store transactions. And for some part of that, we're also looking into maybe we can, with anonymized data, use Cockroach and leverage the security features Cockroach has, including audit streams, etc., to maybe run analytics on anonymized data out of this very hard restricted and secure database. So that's something where we would put Cockroach to a bigger use than what we have today. Also interesting, of course, is all of this GDPR functionality baked into the database. If you really talk multi-region setups, which could become more interesting in the future, also for us, where we say, okay, we have one Cockroach here, one there, and connect them, and then data originating from one country just stays within that country. So could also play nicely together with Linkerd cluster mesh functionality that's also maturing now. So that's where we have to do some research and some tests. But that's certainly what I see coming up going forward as we expand also, and we have the SaaS offering, maybe also expanding more countries, etc. So that's going to be interesting.
Yeah, and you bring up a good point. I mean, that's where CockroachDB really shines, is those multi-regional or multi-continental type applications. You know, people talk about having the flexibility to meet data regulations like GDPR, California Data Protection Act, and there's even more coming out with China, Australia, and India, all looking at those types of regulations. So having complete control over the placement of data for those regulatory reasons, it'll be a big and powerful tool that you guys can leverage within CockroachDB in when you could get in, you know, when you're expanding into those regions. The other aspect of that is obviously the performance characteristics. You know, if all of your UK data is located in the UK, all of your German data is located in Germany, and all of your US data is located in the US, that makes, you know, the transatlantic networks hops for typically running distributed systems non-existent. So you get really that, you know, really local read-write latencies and still have the resiliency factor of running across multiple nodes within a single region as well. So no, that's definitely good to hear that you're definitely looking at us for the right things, I think, in terms of the use cases and applications that you guys are building. One thing that I like to sort of finish up on these webinars with is asking you for your personal experience, or what advice you would give others looking to adopt CockroachDB, if you have any advice or any findings from what you've done with Cockroach so far.
Yeah, it's probably one thing, and that is to really introduce the developers early that have to eventually work with it. There's I think the Postgres compatibility and compliancy has grown. I think you're at 100% now. I'm not exactly sure, but
it's about 98
or 99.99.
Yeah, we're pretty close. I mean, the big things we don't support are things that you would imagine, like triggers and stored procedures, because they again build on legacy. You don't be putting business logic inside of a database engine. So, but yeah, we're pretty close, Christian. You're right, and we're increasing it with every single release that we do. Yeah,
but that is probably what I would really advise to introduce the devs first. Plan for some integrate this, see how it works, see what you might need to change, because that's where we struggled a bit. We made it in time, but I mean, we also had only a very short time. But there was also from the application structure, we had to restructure the application a bit to really work with this retry cycles and these kind of things. That is probably the advice I can give.
Yeah, it's a good point, and it's something that I like to bring up with everybody that I talk to. You can't, you know, take an existing application that is using something like Postgres, just drop it into CockroachDB and expect it to work and be super performant and meet all of your dreams and expectations. There's always some form of work there. So to your point, educating yourself either via the Cockroach University or which is our online sort of tutorial place for education, or even if you read through some of our documentation I think is some of the best that I've been involved with in the companies that I've worked in the last 10 or 15 years. So that's really, really, really good. We do have one question that's come in, Christian. So Russell is asking, what Cockroach deployment setup is Christian using? So I think what Russell is trying to get at there is, are you deploying on top of Kubernetes, which I think you are, and you're deploying across multiple clouds as well? depending on the use cases.
Yeah. But we basically deploy on top of Kubernetes. So we are not concerned with AWS or anything being specific, but we just put Kubernetes and then we deploy on top of it. We use Helm still. We are looking into the Cockroach operator, but we're not there yet. So at the moment, the Cockroach Helm chart is part of the umbrella chart for the application stack. So we went with an approach where we have like 20, 25 microservices in this whole stack, give or take a few, and then these have dependencies on reliant technologies, and Cockroach is one of them. And so if you deploy this whole stack, Cockroach is part of the stack, which also ensures that the application version you deploy with that application Helm chart has the right dependency on the compatible or known to be tested Cockroach version. So that's how I hope that answers the question.
I think it does. It answers it for me anyway. So no, I think that will answer it from Russell as well. So awesome. Okay. I mean, there's no more questions that are coming in. So at this point, I'd like to thank you, Christian, for joining us and telling us a little bit about FinLead Connect and the application and use cases that you have. And thanks to all of the audience for joining as well. As I mentioned, this will be on YouTube. It'll be available for download via our website, and we will send out reminder links via email afterwards with download links and everything like that. So again, thanks very much, Christian, and thanks all, and we will catch you on the next webinar.